immediately at the next opportunity. And then this damn pandemic, I would have been there would have been there a couple weeks ago for that other one. And I would have probably been there for this one. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah. I forgot, what's the name of the one that's making landfall north of Mumbai?
It's actually just south of Mumbai. It's in Nisarga.
Nisarga.
Yeah, it's a category 1, Joint Typhoon Warning Center estimated 75 knots. IMD, the Indian India Meteorological Department definitely screwed this one up. They
Welcome to NTWC Live. My name is Alex Garcia. I'm the director of the National Tropical Weather Conference. These programs are made possible by USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Plylox Hurricane Clips. To produce these programs, it's a team effort. We have Bill Reed and Tim Smith with us this morning. Here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all online with us this morning for NTWC Live. We've got a great program for you today. Our guy who just disappeared for a while last year and then managed to come back. So you'll hear from Josh Morgerman in just a few minutes. We are excited to be doing these programs. This is the first one this week. We got another one tomorrow with Dr. Phil Klossbach as he updates his hurricane seasonal forecast. As Alex mentioned, we couldn't do it without our sponsor, South Padre Island, USAA. Plylox, the hurricane clips folks, they may be being purchased up in a big way right now in parts of the Gulf Coast. So with the dramatic music in the background, let's throw it over to Bill Reed, who comes to us today from Houston. Bill?
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being with us again. Tropics are active. We've had two landfalls this morning, one in India, south of Mumbai, Tropical Cyclone Nisarga. Josh informed me there was a Category 1 at landfall. And of more interest to us is what's happening with Cristobal. And if I do this right, I'll be able to show you the radar as it's made landfall. And here we go. And here we go. This is a radar that's been very useful on this storm, Sabancui radar, which is on the Bay of Campeche coast, just to the east of where the sorry about that. My phone went off on me there. The system made landfall just to the west of Ciudad del Carmen this morning. And as you can see there, it had this strong rain bands, that big rain band over the Yucatan, western Yucatan, has been reforming and firing over that area each night for the last 3 days. So incredible rainfall totals have been occurring throughout the area, and the flooding and the loss of life from that will be the main story we hear about from that. Hopefully we've gotten a update. Yeah, there we go. The latest forecast now with increasing confidence, but still some uncertainty as to the track. The models have been focused on the Louisiana coastline for several days now. And as you can see, the official forecast keeps it a tropical storm and brings it inland to south central Louisiana. So start paying attention to it. The intensity forecast is still a bit uncertain, but hopefully it'll stay in the tropical storm mode, and hopefully it'll keep on moving so we don't have the flooding issues that they're seeing down in South and Central America. Okay, what you really are here to see is what we're going to do with Josh this year on the thing, and he hit the jackpot last year with Dorian out in the Bahamas. He tells me he's been made landfalls just about every continent that has them, and he still needs to get India, and he probably would have made that mark this year if it hadn't have been for the COVID issues. So Josh, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Tim. It's awesome to be back with you guys. I'm sorry we couldn't do it in person this year. I always look forward to my April on South Padre Island, Texas, and I'm looking forward to that again next year. But this is awesome as well. I'm very excited to be able to present my experience of Hurricane Dorian. So let me bring that up. Alrighty. So my presentation is on Dorian from ground zero, measuring and surviving the storm of the century. And that might sound like hyperbole, but it is not. It is. I will support that statement in just a second. So just to refresh everyone's memory, of course, most of the people watching this presentation are very familiar with Dorian. It was the big headline last year. And you can see here's the bird's eye view, or the big picture view of its life cycle. Started out as a wave in the middle of the Atlantic, moved west, clipped the Caribbean. Then when it got out into the open Atlantic, it exploded into a really intense hurricane, smashed the Bahamas at maximum intensity. And then very quickly cut north, missed Florida, clipped the Carolinas, and then unraveled over the Canadian Maritimes. And here's sort of the fact sheet on the storm. And you could see the dates for this thing. It was basically right at the climatological peak of the season, maybe just right before, but the timing of it made sense. The peak intensity was a whopping 160 knots or 185 miles an hour, making this thing one of the real legends of the Atlantic. And you can see that a lot of people felt the wrath of this thing. A lot of land masses got stricken by it when it was at hurricane force. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, what I'm specifically interested in is the landfall on Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas when it hit at 160 knots. Now, that's really significant because when you look at history, you could see where Dorian falls. This is the list of all known Category 5 hurricane landfalls in North America as far back as records go, which is the middle of the 19th century. And you can see that if you rank them by wind speed, Dorian is at the top, at the very top, tied with the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 in Florida, both of which had estimated winds of 160 knots or 185 miles an hour at landfall. And when you see it put like this, you can see how serious this storm was and why I call it the storm of the century. And here it is at that dramatic moment as it was coming ashore on Great Abaco Island. You can see that beautifully formed eye and just that intense looking core. Now, very fortunately, I was there to document this historic event. In fact, that star represents where I was. And that's, of course, when I was inside the eye. So probably a lot of people watching this presentation know who I am, but just in case you don't, let me give you some really quick background on me. I'm a hurricane chaser, very specifically a hurricane chaser. Folks always ask me, hey, do you chase tornadoes or snowstorms? No, I do not. I am very not versatile. I'm narrowly obsessed with hurricanes, and I've been chasing them for almost 30 years. My first chase, I was too young to even rent a car to drive after the storm, so I chased it by train, and this was before the internet even. So back then it was paper maps and things like that. I chase around the world, every hemisphere. I chase very aggressively. I'm competitive about it. I treat it like a sport. And also, I do not have any formal meteorological credentials. I'm very, very good at collecting accurate, quality-controlled field data. That's what I do. But no, I am technically not a scientist. I'm very obsessive about what I do. Here's my portfolio of chases. This is the 49 hurricanes and typhoons in which I penetrated at least the eye wall. For me, if I don't get in the eye wall, it doesn't count. It's considered a bust. So these are the 49 eye wall scores that I've had. I'm wondering where 50, when and where 50 is going to be. I thought maybe it might be Crystal Ball in Texas or Louisiana this week, but not feeling so sure about that this morning, but we'll see. So my chasing, people ask me, well, why do you chase? Why do you do this? Definitely, I think the initial itch was definitely some kind of thrill-seeking thing, just getting that adrenaline rush from hurricanes that I do every time. And that's still motivating. But for me, the big thing now, the thing that really gets me excited and drives me is what I call truth-seeking. So it started for me about 10 years ago. There were a couple of big typhoon landfalls in the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, in case you don't know, the U.S. states of like Oklahoma and Kansas are probably like the tornado capital of the world. Well, when it comes to hurricanes, it's the Philippines. Of course, over there, they're called typhoons, but the Philippines is the world capital. They get Category 5 landfalls like a couple of times a decade at least. And there were a couple of big ones about 10 years ago. And there were no meteorological records of these events as they came ashore. Nothing. No recon data, no ground stations, nothing. All we knew about these storms were what we could kind of glean from satellite intensity estimates. And I found that really frustrating that these incredible landfall events were not being recorded. And then I realized, hey, I can make a difference because I'm hunting these things down anyway. Often in remote areas. And so that is my big driving passion now, is to just get inside the cores of these cyclones coming ashore in remote areas. Now, because I'm just hopping all over the world and sometimes jumping between islands, on little tiny planes and stuff, I got to be super portable. I don't have any like big van tricked out with equipment and stuff like that. Everything's got to be small and easy to carry around. So the things that I shoot to measure are air pressure and then I also take very meticulous video that's all time stamped. I keep track of my location at all times. And just with those bits of data, quality, accurately recorded data. I can make all kinds of inferences afterward about the hurricane's size, its structure, and other things about it. And it's not just for me. Scientists actually use my data. The National Hurricane Center uses my data. PhDs use my data. My data become very useful. Oftentimes it's like sort of the missing puzzle piece when they're doing post-analysis on storms. I think of myself as kind of like the hunting dog for scientists. So I'm not the scientist, but I'm hunting down the data for them. And what am I hunting exactly? Well, like I said, I'm going after the core of the hurricane, that inner part, because that's where all the really meaningful data is. In a few recent storms, my data were basically the only data at landfall. And a good recent example would be Hurricane Willa in Mexico. There were basically no observations from the core of that, except for the sensors that I put at various points in the landfall region. And from those data, the Hurricane Center was able to kind of reconstruct what happened, and it made their report more complete. And that was awesome. I felt really good about that. All right. That's me. So let's get back to Dorian. And I thought I'd bring you along on the chase. I think a lot of folks don't realize how complicated chasing is and how emotional the process is. So I thought I'd bring you through the decision-making process step by step so you can see what it's like. So again, here's the big picture track of Dorian from its birth in the tropics to its unraveling, its demise over Canada. And if we zoom in close, you can see this is a significant part of its life cycle. So Dorian was first named, I think, it was 24th of August. I was in New York at the time, and my initial instinct was that I was going to chase it in the Dominican Republic. And so I booked a flight to Santo Domingo, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'm gonna catch this thing as a hurricane on the south coast of the Dominican Republic. Cool. And I very quickly canceled that plan and instead decided to go to Punta Cana, which is at the very eastern tip of the Dominican Republic. And that was my plan, and I was ready to go. But as this thing entered the Caribbean, it never really got going. And of course, as a lot of people know, that's climatologically pretty normal. Eastern Caribbean is often fairly unfriendly to tropical cyclones. So I canceled that plan and just decided to wait until this thing got out of the Caribbean. Sure enough, cut 2 days later, it's out in the open Atlantic. It's a monster hurricane. And all the computer models are saying that this is going to ram the east coast of Florida as an intense hurricane. So I flew down to Orlando. And by the way, that's an MO of mine. I never fly into coastal airports. I always fly into inland airports and then drive to where I want to be. That's a little chaser dude rule of mine. And then from there, I drove to West Palm Beach and I slept overnight. And then I noticed, of course, that the computer models were changing again. They started to show the hurricane not hitting Florida, but actually stalling just offshore. And then they started to show it making a very quick U-turn, or not a U-turn, but a really sharp turn off of Florida. And it was at that point that I realized that if I wanted to taste this historic storm, if I wanted to sample it, if I wanted to measure it, if I wanted to get inside of it, I had to get off the Florida Peninsula and head to the Bahamas, specifically to Great Abaco Island. And that's what I did. And here's my plane ticket. I saved it because it has significance to me. This was the last flight onto Great Abaco Island to the airport in Marsh Harbor. After that, once we landed, it was the day before the hurricane, the airport closed down, and that was that. And the airport did not open for a very, very long time afterward, and you'll see why in just a moment. Now, in case you're wondering, Marsh Harbor is sort of like the de facto capital of Great Abaco Island. It's a town of about 6,000 people. It's the commercial and administrative hub for the island. And I like to show this view so you could see the Bahamas are, it's a separate country. We think of it as far away, but look how close it is. That flight from West Palm Beach to Marsh Harbor is really, God, it's probably like 40 minutes. I mean, it's nothing. You pop right over there. You're practically in Florida. So I landed in Marsh Harbor, and then from there I drove north to a place called Treasure Key. That's about a 20-mile drive there, what you're looking at. And I had a place staked out where you could see the red circle. And here's a dramatic selfie that I took when I arrived there. And this is where I was going to ride out the hurricane. Now, at this point, Dorian was a Category 4, so it was a serious hurricane, not yet at the kind of historic level, but it was definitely a serious hurricane heading toward me. And I thought, okay, these condos are sturdy. This is going to be an incredible front row seat to this hurricane. I'm going to get incredible video. I'm going to capture incredible data. This is going to be like, wow, this is going to be amazing, this location. And here's the other side of that bank of condos, what they look like. These are 3-story buildings made mostly of concrete, but not entirely. And this is a final shot I took as the sun was going down. This is this is the night before Dorian struck this island. And I always look at this picture because it shows you the beauty of Great Abaco Island. And just you can imagine the lifestyle of just living there, how idyllic and how pretty it is. And just like it's so serene. And it kind of breaks my heart looking at this because that was kind of that was the last night of paradise for this place for a very long time to come. And when I say very long, I'm talking like over a decade probably because of the impact that happened here. So I forced myself to go to sleep for a couple hours. That's something I've been trying to get better about, is getting some sleep when I'm on chases. So I'm not just going, because usually by the time the hurricane strikes, I'm exhausted and I'm just running totally on adrenaline, which is not healthy. I woke up in the middle of the night, or actually in the wee morning hours, and I started to hear the wind howling. And it was just, I've been in a lot of hurricanes, but there's something about the howl that started to creep me out. I started to get like a spooked kind of feeling, which I usually don't get. You guys know I'm like rabid about chasing hurricanes. But something about it made me uneasy. And I remember I was laying in bed and I went on my phone. I started looking at the recon data. They were doing a recon flight in the storm, and it started showing Category 5 winds. Something was happening in the storm. It looked like it was kind of having some sort of upswing. And I was like, oh boy. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think that this is a good place to ride out the storm. I just started feeling like I was playing games with my life. So late that night, or probably around 3 or 4 in the morning, I packed the car and I drove back down to Marsh Harbor. And it was a dark, lonely drive, but I just felt like, you know what, this is what I have to do to be safe. I'm a very aggressive chaser, but I've got to, I need to make sure I survive these events. So there were actually 2 reasons I went back down to Marsh Harbor. One was, as I said, I didn't quite feel safe in that location in Treasure Key. But the other reason was that the storm was moving due west at this point, and it was very, very important to me to get in Dorian's eye. I didn't want to just get in the eye wall. I wanted to get in that eye. It was extremely important to me, and I didn't want to miss that. So I figured I should go back down south, and that's what I did. Now, if we zoom in on the storm's track, these are the hourly positions as the storm passed over Great Abaco and then Grand Bahama Islands. And you can see the star that's marked I cyclone. That's where I was. And you can see I nailed it pretty good, my final location. Here's a zoomed in look, and you can see, yeah, that 2 p.m. location is basically, that 2 p.m. position of the hurricane center that's basically right on top of me. And a very, very close view, you can see I actually had 2 locations during the storm. Position A was where I was at the beginning of the storm, and then during the eye, I had to relocate because of damage to the building. I'll talk about that in a little while. B is where I relocated to, and the distance between those 2 points is about, 2/3 of a mile. All right, so now let's go through the impact and what I measured and what I saw. So when I got back to Marsh Harbor, I was like, all right, this hurricane's looking really strong. There's 2 things I need to figure out. I need to find a building that's strong, like i.e. concrete, and 2, that's elevated, that's high enough that I'm not going to get hit by the storm surge. So there's a hilly neighborhood of Marsh Harbor, and I drove around it until I found a big concrete-looking building, which was the Central Abaco Primary School, and sure enough, it was open as a shelter. I generally don't like to go use hurricane shelters as places to ride out storms, because it cuts down on your autonomy a little bit, but it seemed like the right bet. And so that's where I decided to ride out this storm, at this primary school with probably a couple hundred other people. And take a look at the outside of the building. This is like the parking lot. Take a look at those trees. Remember what they look like, because it's going to be radically transformed in just a little while. All right, so once I got there, I set up with 2 barometers. I always try to have at least 2 instruments going, so I have some data redundancy. So if I get really, really wild readings, I'll have another instrument to corroborate. So I went down to this shore, which was not too far away, and I got sea level pressure, and then I used the devices as pressure altimeters to then figure out my elevation at the school, so I could then calibrate for sea level pressure. And then I also had a couple of cameras going. And with those tools, I recorded this event. Now, recording or documenting Dorian was challenging. Documenting storms that are so violent like this make it hard to do good documentation. But even so, I was able to get what I needed to get to infer all kinds of things about this storm. All right, so one of the first things I do when I come back after a hurricane is I like to reconstruct a very detailed chronology of what happened. Okay, so what I do is I go through my video footage minute by minute. It's all very precisely time-stamped. And I go through my pressure data and I then create sort of a log of what happened. And then the next thing I do is I try to sort of identify the phases of the hurricane and I color code those. So with this, you could see, you don't have to read all this, don't worry, but just to give you a general idea, pink means we're getting into the eye wall. Red means we're in what seem to be the peak winds. Blue is when we're in the calm eye. Now, these are, I was not measuring wind data, so these are subjectively assigned phases. And that means they're not exactly precise, but I think they help in terms of giving a good idea of the duration of the event and also the size of the hurricane and things like that. And you'll see, I'm going to show you video clips of certain parts of this chronology, and you'll see that it's pretty easy to identify these phases. You could see them, even though they're subjectively assigned. Here's another look at the same information and the same data, but here visualized as a graph. And you can see as the pressure fall, we go into the pink, which is the eye wall, and then the dark pink, which is the peak winds, and then the blue of the which is the calm eye. And you can see that the duration of that really, really bad part was about an hour and a half. I measured 913.4 millibars in the eye, which is by far the lowest I've recorded in any chase. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So now what I want to do is bring you through the experience. I want to bring you through specific moments of this event, because I think it was quite fascinating just being the strongest hurricane ever to hit North America. All right, so back at our chronology, first what I want to show you is the outer eye wall, okay? And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting this storm did not have concentric eye walls. It had one consolidated eye wall. What I'm talking about is what it was like just as we started to enter the outer part of that one eye wall. And just to give you a little visual help here, here's the radar. And you could see, okay, this storm has a single consolidated eye wall. And that star is where I was. That's Marsh Harbor. And you could see this video clip is just as we were just getting into that eye wall. And you can see we're already getting very destructive winds, but we're nowhere near the really bad stuff yet. So let's take a look at that. Just before noon, and we're at 960 millibars. The wind is ripping really hard, but the scary thing is we have like another almost 40 millibars to lose. We have a lot of isobars to go through, a lot of gradients. I think the wind's going to get worse. Wow. All right, so that's just a small, oops, sorry about that. There we go. So that's just a small taste of what's to come. Now, by the way, I wanted to give you a little more detail about where I was. So once the storm really started to hit, the military dudes that were watching the shelter just made everyone had to get in classrooms. And rule number one when you're chasing is don't be a nuisance and don't argue with authorities. You must do as instructed, because the last thing you want to do is be some person from out of town who's getting in the way and disobeying rules. So my choices were to hunker down in a classroom or ride the storm out in my car in the parking lot, which would be a really, really bad idea in a 185 mile an hour wind. So I chose to be a classroom, and I was in so it was just a simple 4-wall concrete classroom with exterior walls on all sides. The school was actually a complex of very small buildings. And I was with 2 families and 3 other men. So there were 11 of us. And there were windows on the upwind side of the room and windows on the downwind side. The windows, and I'm giving you all this information so you can understand what's happening in the video. The windows on the upwind side, meaning they were facing the wind, were boarded up and had cyclone shutters on them. The windows on the downwind side, we could actually open the cyclone shutters and look through the cracks. And that's all the filming that I'm doing during sort of the brunt of the hurricane is through that view, through the downwind side of the windows. And that's what we're looking at. And we're looking out toward the front, we're looking out from the front of the building into the parking lot. And you can see there's cars parked near us that are getting hammered pretty good, but they're actually slightly protected by the building that we're in. All right, So now that I gave you that orientation, now what I want to show you is the transition from being in the eye wall to being in what the inner eye wall when stuff starts to get really nuts, when we start to get those really crazy turbulent gusts and everything, we start to get into something of a whiteout, and you can see it really starting to crank. Now, one thing you're going to notice in this next segment is everyone in the room is rubbing their ears. It's killing everyone's ears. Now, people think that that's because the pressure in a hurricane is low. It's actually, that's not what causes that. When your ears hurt during a hurricane, it's because you're in a very turbulent part of it and you're getting extreme wind gusts passing over the building, which are causing temporary pressure fluctuations, and that's what your ears are feeling. And we were getting such violent gusts that's what was causing it. And it is really painful. You feel like your eardrums are going to totally bust. So here we go. Let's take a look at that. Oh, actually, I forgot. I wanted to do some science and nerd out on you before I show you the video. You got to eat your vegetables first. This is actually really fascinating. Okay, so this is a close-up view of the data that I showed you before, but this is a close-up view of just the core of the hurricane. Now, notice something really interesting. The video I just showed you was from the light pink part, which was, okay, we're in the eye wall, but we're not in the inner part of it yet. Notice that in that part, the pressure is dropping in a fairly sort of behaved, steady way. Now, as we get into the inner part of the eye wall, where we get into what seem to be the peak winds and the maximum turbulence, notice how the pressure starts to get it fluctuates kind of wildly, that the line is more jagged. There's like these up and down fluctuations. That is a good indicator of what the inner core of a violent hurricane is like. There's a lot of turbulence in that inner eye wall. There are like all kinds of localized disturbances and eddies and maybe some mesovortices going on in that. And even though you can't see these things happening, you can see them in the pressure trace afterward. The pressure trace is almost like taking an X-ray. It shows you things that are happening that you maybe can't see because everything outside is just turning white. So what I'm going to show you in this next video is as we transition from the light pink to the dark pink, we're going into like the kind of really extreme part of the hurricane. All right, so let's take a, okay, so you digested your science part, now you can have the dessert. Okay, here's the video for that. See the cars bobbing up and down. Well, the cars are like picking up. I'm ready for it. This that we're in it. All right. So by that point, we were getting full on raked. All right. So then the hurricane slowly crept over us, and then we were in that inner part of the eye wall. And I found this in violent hurricanes, that the worst part of the hurricane when it gets especially violent is actually, it literally is almost, it's right at that boundary between the eye wall and the eye. It's very interesting. In fact, I've noticed it in many hurricanes that some of the most violent gusts, they almost happen right as you're entering the eye. It's like the final gasp from the eye wall is sometimes like the worst part of it. So now I'm going to show you video from that part. So this was like as a chaser and as a hurricane nerd, this is like my lifelong fantasy. It's like, okay, I want to be in a like high-end Category 5 hurricane on a tropical island, or technically subtropical, but you know what I mean. with, flat terrain, nothing to interfere with the wind flow, and it's daytime. It's like optimal conditions to record this event. And I was like, wow, this is perfect. But it actually wasn't what I expected. And what I mean by that is that you couldn't see anything. Okay. So I'm going to show you now in the chronology, I'm going to show you when we're deep in that eye wall and how basically the conditions got so turbulent and crazy. In fact, one of the specialists at the Hurricane Center looked at the video and he's like, your video actually would have been better if the hurricane weren't as bad because you'd be able to see something. So everything just kind of turns white. But I want to give you an idea about that. And what's really interesting is that a lot of the really extreme destruction and some of the weird stuff, like for example, cars in front of the window just blowing away, a lot of that happened behind this sort of curtain of white that just kind of happened for about 30 minutes. But let me show you a little piece of that just so you could see what it was like not to see anything. You can occasionally see debris flying by. Those are the upwind windows, which we're worried about caving in. All righty, yeah. So we were getting full on raked there. So I couldn't see what was going on, but the barometers could, and they were recording some incredible things. So when I went back over the data afterward, it was the data from this part of the event that most blew my mind and was like, whoa. So the data showed some really incredible air pressure drops over very short periods of time. And they suggest that there were some very, very extreme pressure gradients in the inner core of this thing. So Dorian was moving steadily west at 6 knots or 6 nautical miles an hour as it passed over my location, as I went right through it. Okay. So therefore you can assume that the devices that were at my location and that were recording data in that room sampled 1 nautical mile of the cyclone every 10 minutes. And therefore I could take pressure changes over 10-minute periods and therefore understand those to basically indicate the gradients over 1 nautical mile samples of the cyclone. And what I got when I did that, when I went through the data, was I found many examples of gradients well over 10 millibars a nautical mile and some much higher. And that is nuts. Now, of course, these are rough calculations and they don't take into account smaller scale features within the system. And granted, they're rough, but they still give you an idea of just the incredible sort of just the incredible gradients in that inner core. And let me show you some of the maximum ones. So this is the same data, but we're zoomed in even closer on the inner eye wall. And you could see the values that I calculated. The peak gradient that I got was 12.4 millibars per nautical miles, which is just, that's like off the charts. That's really crazy. And it was during that very sort of jagged period when the pressure was fluctuating wildly up and down. And I do this for all the major hurricanes I'm in. And I wanted to show you how Dorian compared to some of the other crazy ones that I've been in. And you could see Dorian totally kicks butt, just blows all the other ones out of the water. On second place is Hurricane Patricia in Mexico. Now, Patricia was the strongest hurricane ever observed on Earth. It's estimated sustained winds of 185 knots. Or 215 miles an hour. It weakened before it got to me on the coast, but it still had a really intense core there, 10.5 millibars per nautical mile. Michael in the Florida Panhandle was also pretty high. Maria as well. Those are some of the legends in terms of gradients that I calculated, but nothing like Dorian. I mean, Dorian was just like, it knocked all the other ones out of the water, and that was really something to see. All right, so now I want to bring you to one of the most magical parts of a hurricane, which is as you transition from the inner eye wall into the eye, which it's always just kind of for me, it's almost like a religious experience. All right, so here it is on the chronology, transitioning from the red, the peak winds, to the eye. And here's what it was like. Now you'll notice in part of this video, someone in the room took my phone for part of this, and she filmed a couple of shots while I was busy trying to keep the windows from caving in. The windows on the upwind side of the room, the board started to rip off, and the shutters started to bend inward. We were very concerned because if those shutters gave, the room was going to become a shooting gallery of flying debris. And in fact, I remember at the time thinking we were very unlucky. And as it turned out, we were the luckiest of anyone in the entire school, because other classrooms on the complex had blown open, and people were, just having to dive under furniture, in a Category 5 hurricane with the roof gone. I mean, it was an ugly scene all around. So we were pretty lucky. But here you can see, watch it. And one other thing to look at in this clip, notice while we're holding the furniture against the shutters that it starts to kind of get bright, and there's actually sunshine. Even though the wind is roaring and it's probably blowing at 130 knots, there's sunshine coming through the slats in the cracks in the shutters. We were getting so close to the eye that we were actually getting sunshine, even though we were in winds well over hurricane force. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. So check it out. The boards blew up the windows to try to keep them out, keep out the winds. It's 107. Sky is brightening. Pressure is like, it's been fluctuating between like 914 and 918 millibars. I think we're almost in the eye. Oh my God, I think we're almost in the eye. Wow. Cars just thrown all over the parking lot, like every which way. Wow. All right. And I took this still for my video. This is kind of a magical moment. It almost has like a religious look. This is as the sunshine was coming through the window slats, and everyone was just looking out, as the eye was passing over us. And here's the radar shot from this time. And this was like a bullseye, just nailed this one real good right in the middle. And that's a as a lot of the folks watching this presentation know, that's from a hurricane standpoint, this is a beautiful specimen, just the way this eye wall is formed. I mean, this was really, I won't see something like this again in my lifetime, I don't think. All right, so now what I want to do is bring you through the eye, okay? And this is a longer clip because I just want you to experience it as I experienced it as I went outside. So the door was wedged shut. We couldn't open it because debris had slammed against it and dented it. We had to kind of force it open. And the video starts from when we forced the door open. And just you're going to come on a walk with me, and you're going to see what this place looks like after it got hammered by a 160 knot eye wall. Notice the car is just thrown all over the place. They were obviously not parked that way. A lot of concrete is smashed. And here's the stadium eye. All righty. So there's something really apocalyptic about that. I just remember being like, whoa, here's a still of that stadium eye. You could see it was getting a little misty because the hurricane was interacting with land, but you could very clearly see that shape, that perfect shape of that eye wall. It was quite gorgeous. Notice that the cars were mutilated. Like I'd never seen this after a hurricane, where the trunks and hoods were just like ripped open, and the engines inside were mangled. Just like crazy looking stuff I'd like never seen in a hurricane before. It was like really like whoa. You could see a lot of concrete parts of even though the building was concrete or blocks, it was just like in a lot of places just smashed and like ripped open. Parts of the building that were not concrete were just no match for this hurricane. This wood part of the school just collapsed like a house of cards. Now I want to show you a couple of interesting before and after views. So this is the view from the window where I was shooting from. This is right before the eye wall arrived. Now, the little black Honda to the left of the tree, that's actually my car, okay? And notice there's like a truck next to it. And this is right as we were entering the eye. You could see the truck next to my car is gone. It just blew away. It kind of ended up on the other side of the parking lot. Interestingly, my car just stayed. It didn't even have a scratch. And it shows you that violent hurricane eye wall winds have the kind of erratic, localized nature of tornadoes. It's like the damage can be very streaky and weird. It's not uniform, even over small areas. And here's another before and after. Again, this is the view from the window. This is during the eye wall. So notice on the right, there's a tree, a felled tree. And now look at that same tree during the eye. This is right after the inner eye wall when we're in the eye, and notice, oh, wow, okay, it's from a different angle. But now there's a car on top of that tree. I don't know where that car came from, which direction. I literally don't know where it came from. It's just once the eye arrived, once that cloak of whiteness disappeared, there was like a car sitting on top of that tree. Don't know which direction it came from. This is the front of the building. I told you earlier on to remember that shot, all those lush green trees, and that's what it looked like afterward. These trees are actually designed by nature to just let go of their leaves, and that's actually how they survived. They were able to withstand the wind because they just let go of all the resistance. All those leaves just flew right off. But it doesn't look like a subtropical island anymore. It looks like we're in Siberia in the middle of the winter. All right, so I measured, as I said, 913.4 millibars in the eye. It was by far the lowest thing I ever recorded. Now, you guys saw my pressure trace and you saw how it went down, but there's no recovery. It doesn't come back up. I don't have a hurricane V. I just have like what looks like half of a V. And you guys are probably wondering, okay, why? What happened to the rest of the data? Well, the building was badly damaged, and after talking with my roommates, the people that I rode out the front half of the storm with in that room, we decided that we needed to relocate to another building in order to survive. And once you relocate, you can't keep collecting data. The data wouldn't have integrity. You know, you have to keep the instruments in a controlled environment. So I had to make the hard choice. I really couldn't decide if I wanted to just stay there and risk it and keep collecting data or leave and find safety. And actually, honestly, one of the factors that influenced me was just that out of the 11 of us, we only had 3 cars that were still functioning, that weren't destroyed. One of them was mine, and I felt some responsibility. You know, 3 other people needed a ride in my car to get to safety, and I decided that maybe that was a little more important than science. So I stopped recording at that point. It's possible my lowest pressure would have been lower if I'd kept recording. Who knows? You know, I just try not to let let that gnaw away at me. But you know, when I look at my pressure graph, the way it looks like the pressure is starting to edge up again. So there's a good chance that 913 was actually a real minimum. All right. So I said we had to relocate. And here's a map of this part of the island. A is where we were, is at school, and B is where we ended up. And that distance is only about 2/3 of a mile. It's not far at all. Sorry, I was just closing a window because a nearby gardener is making sounds with that leaf blower thing. Okay, so it was only 2/3 of a mile, but it was one of the longest, it felt like one of the longest drives ever. Now remember, at this point, I had no communication with the outside world, no nothing, no radar. I had no idea when the backside was gonna hit. And if we were stuck out on the road in those winds, we'd be dead. So it was a scary drive. Of course, the highway was littered with debris, and we were having, I was having to drive onto the grass and all kinds of crazy stuff. But eventually, we did make it to the Bahamas government complex. And here's the inner courtyard. Now, the Bahamians really know how to build for hurricanes, and this building is up to their code. And look at that roof. That roof, there's not a piece missing. They know how to build for these things. There's a lot of cosmetic damage. Those fancy-looking columns all got torn off because they were just junk, but the actual structure is very solid. Now, the interesting thing, and I wasn't filming during this time because I was driving and then I was lugging stuff, but when we got to this building, this is the biggest building on the island, and we were in the eye, and it was like people from every direction were running toward this building and driving toward it. It was like this mecca. People whose houses had collapsed, people who had swam to safety from the storm surge. Everyone was just like us, with like these desperate rats. We were all just trying to get inside this building before the backside hit, and hundreds of people packed into this building before the backside of the cyclone hit. And then we got in it, and this was a safe building. And this building also had impact glass, meaning that you don't need to board up the windows. The glass doesn't break even if it's stricken by flying debris. So actually, in this part of the storm, I was able to actually watch outside of a window for a part of it. And I'll just give you a small taste of what the backside was like. Just a quick clip here. That's okay. Oh. All right. So that gave you a little taste of that. So by around 4 p.m., the storm, the worst of it, the core of the hurricane had passed. And for victims, the misery was just beginning. So you guys remember, a lot of you I know were tracking this at home. But one thing that everyone noticed was how the system really slowed down. And as the core of the hurricane went onto the neighboring island, onto Grand Bahama Island, it basically just stopped moving. And for us on Great Abaco, what that meant was we were stuck in a strong tropical storm for 2 days. Okay. So after this hurricane passed, and you got all these people that are victims of this horrible storm, they've lost everything. They've lost homes. Some of them have lost loved ones. All they have is the clothes on their back. Hundreds of them crammed into this building that doesn't have plumbing. Food is limited. There isn't electricity. The medical clinic is totally overwhelmed. And it's days of like torrential rain and tropical storm force winds. I mean, it was like salt on the wound for these people. It was heartbreaking. It was really bad. Me, I was of course incommunicado for a couple of days. And I remember when I didn't realize how like the Twitterverse was freaking out about this, and I was, presumed dead and all these other horrible things. But during that time when everyone thought I was dead, I was living in my car. I didn't want to take up space in the government building. Like I said, rule number one when you're chasing is try not to be a burden. So I was living in my car, which actually was nice. I was able to control my space, keep it clean, and I just kind of rationed my food. I had a certain amount of calories that I allowed myself to eat per day, just so I could last a long time if I had to. And eventually I finally got off the island a few days later via helicopter. So now I want to show you the aftermath and some of the things that we can learn from it. All right. So the damage across Marsh Harbor, this town of about 6,000 people, not surprisingly, was catastrophic. So the storm surge was tremendous, and I didn't get a chance to actually do any careful measurements, but it was clearly very, very high. The watermarks on buildings were extremely high. It was obviously well over 20 feet, and it just swept the low-lying areas with just devastating force. The commercial promenade, where all the restaurants and stuff were, was just like reduced to rubble, and the poorer neighborhoods, like these neighborhoods called the Mud and the Pigeon Peas, which I'm going to talk about more in a second, they were just, some neighborhoods were completely swept away. Like you couldn't even find where the streets were. Neighborhoods, some of the more affluent neighborhoods that were above the water, that were in hills, were just, they had extreme wind damage. Like almost every house was just badly damaged, and cars were smashed and mutilated, thrown around like toys. And one thing I did notice, construction quality mattered. You could really see certain houses, and I'll show you some examples. Some houses did really well, even in a direct hit from a 160 knot hurricane. Clearly, some of these houses were put together very well. Like I said, the Bahamians, they really know how to build for hurricanes. They've got strict codes on these islands, and anything that's up to code performs well, even in a Category 5. So let's take a look. First of all, as I showed you before, lots of crazy car damage. Like look at that hood. Like what happened to that thing? Like why did it get that way? Why is it like it got like desurfaced? But it's just weird, man. It's like that's an extreme wind that would do stuff like that. The Bahamas government complex is in the background. Look at that building. It looks almost untouched. Look at that roof. That's some good construction there. My car was still working, so while I was stuck there, I was able to be helpful. I took an injured guy to a medical clinic, and I took this fellow and his wife to their house to get their stuff. This is from the more affluent suburban part of the town called the Central Pines region, but their house was made of wood, and it unfortunately, it couldn't withstand those winds. Now, his wife could not find her car. It wasn't where she parked it. She was like, I don't know where it went. And we eventually found it. It had blown across the street, down a hill, and into a forest. Like we eventually found it, but it was so far that she almost missed it. This is another part of that neighborhood. Now look at that car just thrown around like a toy, wedged between a couple of other cars, but look at the houses behind it. They look pretty good, huh? Look at those roofs. Those houses are well constructed. They're like little concrete bunkers, and those roofs are really well fastened that they withstood that, even though the cars were thrown around like toys. And those are not small cars. Here's other houses that, again, these look to be pretty well constructed houses. There's damage to them, but they withstood the winds well enough to protect the occupants. So I would say these houses, although they look beat up, when you consider what they went through, these performed pretty well. This one did not. This clearly wasn't up to code, and it's just a pile of rubble. It looks like a tornado hit it. Here's another one where I guess the roof was not up to the Bahamian standards there, and unfortunately, just most of it came off. And here's one where the second story obviously took a beating because the winds were a little higher as you go up. This is, now let's look at storm surge damage. This is the sort of main business district, or what was the main business district of Marsh Harbor, where there's hotels and restaurants, and you can see it's just all rubble. The 1-2 punch of the storm surge and the wind made quick work of that. And that water was like a bulldozer. It just knocked over even these sort of concrete block structures couldn't withstand it. Now I want to show you some really interesting aerials, some befores and afters. So this is Marsh Harbor, like basically the entire town. And you can see my two locations are labeled. Location A is that's the school where I did most of the filming of the front part of the hurricane. And location B is the government complex. You can see they're not so far apart. So that's before the hurricane, and that's after. And of course, one thing you notice is that everything's brown because all the vegetation was killed, and you can also see like all the wreckage and destruction. And we can zoom in closer so you can see a little better. Okay, so this is the more western part of the town. So the left part that looks sort of like a very suburban, like kind of planned subdivision, that's the Central Pines region that I was telling you about. This is a more affluent area of town, and you can see on the right is the school where I wrote out the hurricane. You could actually of that little complex, the lower left building is the one that I was in. You can see it facing the parking lot. So So this is before the hurricane, and this is after. And you can see all the damage to the houses, or hopefully you can in the resolution that you're seeing this at, but you can just see every house has like major damage and is missing roofs. And again, everything's brown. And let's look at another part of town. Okay, so this view shows you in the lower left is the Bahamas government complex, that big kind of square looking building with a big courtyard. And then right kind of in the central upper part of the image, you can see a neighborhood that's, it looks very dense. There's a lot of like twisty roads and little tiny buildings. That's called the Mud and the Pigeon Pea. This is a very low-lying area. It's also a poorer neighborhood, and it tends to be where a lot of undocumented Haitian immigrants live. And apparently they tried to evacuate this area, but because a lot of the immigrants there are undocumented, they were maybe scared to listen to government orders, and a lot of people decided to stay, which was very unfortunate because this was where the most catastrophic damage happened. So this is before, and this is after, and I'm going to toggle back and forth. So look at the Mud and the Pigeon Pea. Look at that area again. It's kind of like that sort of central knot of twisty roads and small buildings very close together. You can see it's literally just swept away. It's bulldozed. It's gone. And I'm going to show you some ground level views of that now. This is what the Mud and Pigeon Pea look like from the ground level. Okay. And remember, this was a neighborhood. This was like, there were houses, and there were like 2-story buildings. There were shops, there were streets. There's nothing now. It's just literally a field of rubble. You could see what looks like a bar or tavern standing in the distance, but there's just like nothing there. It was, out of all the years I've chased hurricanes, the only other storm where I saw destruction like this was Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, that even came close to this, like the completeness of this destruction. And what the picture doesn't capture was that you could smell the death. There were bodies under this wreckage, and we'll never know how many people died in this storm because a lot of the people who died weren't documented residents. And so I'm sure that the official death toll is an undercount. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of residents from this area, people who lived here. A lot of the Haitians speak a little English, most of them. So it's not their main language, but they speak enough that we were able to communicate. And I was able to ask them what they experienced, what happened. And some of the people that I met at the government complex tried to ride out the storm in this neighborhood and actually had to swim to safety to get to that government complex because, this is what happened there. But some of them, I talked to some people who actually saw their loved ones swept away. I mean, horrible stories that just like you couldn't believe. Every person I talked to had an epic tale of how they escaped. It was the most unbelievable thing. And I want to show you, here's just a video, just because I feel like video that pans around kind of captures the scale of the destruction a little more completely. So here we go. Yeah, when I look at that clip, it just reminds me that there's really nothing like the destructive force of a top end hurricane. It just looks like a nuclear bomb was dropped on that place, and it's really awe inspiring. It just reminds me of just the incredible power of these things. It's amazing that that hurricane, like a hurricane like Dorian, think about it. It's not some evil thing sent by a God that wants to punish us. This is just the earth doing its thing. It's a natural process. It's warm air, starting to spin around, and it's incredible that happens. The human impact of this thing, you can't even get your head around it. The sort of emotional impact of this for residents who lived in this idyllic, beautiful place. And the recovery is going to take a long time. This is not a year. This is not 2 years. This is not 5 years. I think, honestly, Marsh Harbor, we're talking like a generation before this place gets back to normal. I keep in touch. One of the families that was in that room with me, I've kept in touch with. I talked to them a lot, and their life has been an odyssey since this. They spent a few months living in Florida as refugees. Then they were living on another Bahamian island. Now they're back in their house, which is basically destroyed, but the shell is there, and they're trying to rebuild it. And life is nothing like normal in Marsh Harbor. The hurricane was like 9 months ago almost. And, they still don't have like electricity and basic, plumbing in most of these places, let alone, restaurants and things like that. I mean, it is, the infrastructure was destroyed, and it's going to be a long, slow slog for them to get back to normal. So I hope you found that presentation interesting. If you want to follow me on social media, if you don't already, on Twitter and Facebook, I'm at iCyclone. On Instagram, it's iCyclone1, because some kid in United Arab Emirates took iCyclone, and Instagram won't help me with it. So there we go. So I'd be happy to answer questions if anyone has any.
Josh, fascinating presentation as always. Really appreciate the energy and putting yourself out there for this. We appreciate that. Go ahead and unshare your screen so we can see when you answer. Let's start with Nick Morcanelli's question. He says, why were the residents not in the government building the whole time? They had plenty of warning that this was not a storm to ride out. Why did they stay at home for that first half of the storm and not get to that government building, you think?
Okay, so I've noticed in the Philippines also. So people in the Philippines, they know hurricanes, or they call them typhoons, but they're hurricanes. They know hurricanes better than anyone. People in the Philippines have been in the absolute worst. A lot of these people have been in like category 4s, multiple ones. And I think the Bahamas is the same way. And with that knowledge and with that experience comes a certain degree of, it almost backfires. It's like, yes, they know the destructive intensity of these things, but they've also been in them before. And they have, I think, almost like a confidence, like, okay, this is a hurricane. This is going to be a bad one, but we've been in bad hurricanes. And I think it's hard for anybody to, to get their mind around the idea of like, okay, this is going to be a once in 200 year event, and that's completely beyond anything else. Another thing I want to say is that a lot of people did get into, safe buildings, like the school, which was presumed to be safe, where hundreds of people were. No one expected that to blow apart. And another thing I want to say is that the Bahamians, they built houses really good there. I mean, houses mostly perform very well there, even in very severe hurricanes. So if they're above the storm surge line, it really often makes sense for Bahamians to ride out the storm at home. And like I said, the area, the mud and the pigeon pea, that area that was wiped out, as I mentioned before, I think that there were some sociological reasons why evacuations didn't happen there, because those were undocumented residents who were maybe didn't want to reveal themselves to government officials because they were worried. So there were complex things going on there.
Rich Johnson's asking, after this experience with Dorian, do you envision yourself not going to the storms much longer because of the advanced instrumentation, the remote sensing cameras, and everything else that's being put in the front of the storms now? Do you think you're going to keep chasing after this experience?
Absolutely. First of all, chasing is in my blood, and I'm always going to do it. And the data collection is a very big part of it for me, and it's going to continue to be relevant, because even with recon, even with remote sensing, even with all that stuff, there is nothing as good as just taking an old-fashioned barometer and getting in the eye at the surface. There is still nothing as good as that. Nothing from satellite data. Not yet, at least. Okay, and even with recon, for example, Hurricane Patricia and the Pacific Coast, they had recon planes going into this, going into it up until near landfall, but they didn't have one in it at landfall. But I was there at landfall in the eye, so we had a good idea of what the landfall intensity was. And everything else aside, even if my data became totally irrelevant, which they won't in my lifetime, I still just want the experience. There is that side of me that is still just, I don't want to say enraptured by these things, but I continue to be fascinated by them every time.
Marcel Ligabo says he read in the paper that 47% of Floridians won't leave in case of a hurricane. In your opinion, how much will the virus affect? How much effect will the virus have in a major hurricane?
It's a great question, and it's the one that's on everyone's mind. And it's, of course, outside of my area of expertise. That's an emergency management question, and I'm just a dumb hunting dog, But I will say this: I am not I do not envy emergency managers in our hurricane country. When I think of the emergency managers from Texas to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, up Georgia, and the Carolinas, I just feel for all of them, because if a major hurricane does approach and they have to do evacuations, think about it. Evacuation centers are all about cramming people into rooms in tight quarters. How are we going to do this? It's going to be complicated, and I think there's going to have to be rules around it. But like I said, I'm not going to express opinions, because it's really, I consider that an area of expertise, and it's not mine.
You've been through a lot of storms, obviously. Your high penetration is very significant. So you've seen places that have been through a hurricane, and now it's years later since then. How long does it take a place to really get back to full operation? You know, Marsh Harbor is going to be a generation, like you said, but some of these places have been hit before. Have you seen what the time is? How long does it take?
Yeah, it really, it depends on the level of impact. So one of the places that I followed most closely was the Tacloban city in Super Typhoon Haiyan. So Haiyan was actually a tiny bit stronger than Dorian, although I didn't get in the eye, but the right eye wall just passed right over the city. There was a devastating storm surge. Thousands of people died in the city. And this was, by the way, Marsh Harbor was 6,000 people. This is a small town. Tacloban City is 220,000. So this is like a pretty big city that took a direct hit from a big Category 5. So the city was devastated, looked like apocalyptic. And then I went back 3 months later, and then I went back on the year anniversary, because I kind of developed a relationship with the people there. I have all kinds of friends there now, and I feel an emotional connection to the place. And so I was able to see the rebirth, and it was amazing. Even after 3 months, it was like how fast the normalcy came back really impressed me, that there were parts of the town where you almost feel like nothing had happened. And a year later, it was in really good shape. And even some of the neighborhoods that had been totally wiped out were coming back. Now, what Tacloban City had going for it was that it was a pretty big city it has like a critical mass and it had enough buildings that withstood the storm. There was like a core of the city there still. Marsh Harbor is only 6,000 people. And I think that the proportion of destruction to the size of the town was much greater. And I think that Marsh Harbor, I think that it's unlike Tacloban City. I think that the road to recovery, I literally think is going to be, like, we're talking a decade. I think it's going to be like that. One last example I want to bring up is Hurricane Harvey. So I wrote out Hurricane Harvey, a Category 4 in Rockport, Texas, small town that took a direct hit, went right through the eye. They got hammered really bad. They were devastated. I went back like 10 months later for the start of hurricane season. The mayor invited me to sort of make a speech, and they were bouncing back. I mean, I came back, and I just remember you step into the town and all you hear is hammering and saws going. I mean, it was really heartwarming. It was like, wow, man, this place is almost like having a boom. It was coming back, and I felt like that was really cool. But yeah, each town is different. Depends on the impact, the size of the population center, and other things.
Bill, I know you're chomping at the bit to get in here. Bill Reed's got some great questions, I know. So, Bill, what's on your mind with this? This is fascinating. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Dog was barking. I had to stay muted there for a minute. When you went to the Bahamas and chose that location, how did you determine that you were in a safe spot relative to the surge?
I estimated, but it was a visual estimation. So the Bahamas are mostly very flat, but the Abaco, Great Abaco, actually has like not hills, like not like the kind that we have in California, like LA and San Francisco have crazy hills. It doesn't have that kind of hills, but it has some rolling hills. And just driving around the town, like around 4 or 5 a.m., you could see the slope of the hills, and that school, you could see it was kind of on the crest of a gentle hill. And I was confident it would be okay. I had, with my pressure altimeters, I think I estimated an elevation of around 33 feet, and I felt like we would be safe, and we were.
Good, very good. Now, I assume you buy the extra insurance when renting a car. I'm surprised they don't have a hot checklist. Don't rent a car to this guy when a hurricane's coming with your reputation, because I'm sure the cars get damaged.
No, actually, the number one priority for me is to protect the car. And what's interesting is the car that I rented with this storm actually fared better because it was with me. So I had the car on high ground, and actually barely had a scratch. And I actually returned it in really good condition. Well, I didn't return it. I left it where it was and then went to Nassau Island to give the owner the keys. But that car actually was one of the few in their fleet that I think survived, because all the ones where they stored them down near the airport, I think they all flooded.
Yeah, I'm really surprised you didn't get a big piece of debris slam into it. That was fortunate.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to, I always try to predict where, ideally, like in Hurricane Irma, for example, in Florida, about 6 hours before the hurricane struck, I parked the car in an elevated medical center parking structure. Just got rid of the car, just stowed it in a safe place until after the hurricane, because all of Naples was supposed to go underwater. So that's usually what I like to do before the hurricane really hits, is basically just store the car, just put it somewhere safe, somewhere high and somewhere sheltered. When I can't do that, and I try to put it really close to a building, but I always try to make sure that it's in a place that's safer than where it would have been otherwise.
Very good. Do you ever have nightmares or PTSD-like symptoms after one of these events?
It's a really good question. So Super Typhoon Haiyan was, in terms of like human impact, was the worst I've been in. It was as bad as Dorian, but it hit a larger city, and there were thousands of deaths. And I saw things that I'd never seen before. I saw like dead bodies in the street and just stuff like that, which I'd never seen stuff like that before. We went by the medical clinic and I just saw all kinds of people, including children with like traumatic injuries, just like horrible things. And Haiyan was the one that most kind of rattled me. And I remember, I was stuck there for a few days, and, I'm kind of a good survivor. And I remember just telling, I remember I'm good at compartmentalizing. I remember just telling myself, I shut my emotions off. I just literally I rescued people during the storm because I thought people in my hotel were going to die. And I jumped in the water and rescued people. But after the storm, I just shut down my emotions, and I'm just like, all right, I have to focus on survival and how to get home. And I'm not going to feel any emotions. I'm just going to it was like a way to survive. After I got back to LA and after I was home, that's when I felt all the emotions out. I was like crying and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't want to chase for a long time after that. But then I eventually, there's just that itch that I have, it's in my blood to go chasing. But Haiyan was the one that really, it took me a while to kind of get over that one. One way that helped me, well, not to go on about it, but one way was to be involved with the recovery. So I started working with the Filipino community. I got involved with a big fundraiser. I was a featured speaker, just doing stuff like that to raise awareness. That was actually very therapeutic, just to be helpful. And then I'm going back. I went back 3 months later to see how the people were who I'd become friends with. And then I went back on the 1-year anniversary, which for me was a really deep experience too, to be there and celebrate the 1-year anniversary of this event. And those things, it's like they give you sense of meaning and closure with it.
That's very good. Very good of you. Your survival kit, do you purchase it when you get there, or do you take stuff with you as far as food and water and things like that?
I usually just, I always try to travel real light. So I usually get my supplies when I arrive. And the thing, when I chase, I am not hungry. It's like, I literally feel like I'm a hunting dog. Like as soon as I'm starting to think I might be chasing something, when the computer models are starting to converge on a hurricane landfall, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be chasing on 5 days. I notice it's like a slow adrenaline drip starts and I start losing my appetite. And so over a week, I start eating less and less, and I start sleeping less and less because I'm checking like the computer models every 6 hours. But, by the time I get to where I'm going, I'm not really that hungry, so I kind of have to force myself to eat. So I usually just get some really simple food, just basically just stuff that'll supply me with calories, like nuts and crackers, and of course a lot of water. Water is the most important thing, and I just kind of survive on that. I do not eat well during hurricanes. The interesting thing is, as soon as the hurricane passes and as soon as the chase is over, 2 things that I do. One is I just sleep like I was like I was a rock star partying for a week. I sleep like crazy. It's like getting over flu almost. And I eat like crazy. It's like I make up for the whole week of not eating.
They're very interesting. That's many of us that work operationally, have worked hurricanes, have that exact same thing. The adrenaline stifles the urge to eat and sleep. And then when the storm's over, you have to recoup it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to reiterate one point you made to a question about evacuation of the people there, they probably do follow the run from the water, hide from the wind, and quite rightly should, because there's probably not enough large structures to shelter even all the people they needed to potentially could have had moving in from the water. But the chaser motto should be run towards the water and seek out the wind.
Basically, I would say that's pretty accurate.
We've got a couple more questions from Lou Fincher I want to pass on to you, because Lou, a great follower of what you do and what we're doing here. He asked, A, what tools do you pack? And then explain how you're different from other chasers in your goals. You've talked a little bit about that, but maybe touch a little more on that.
So in terms of tools, I feel like I always disappoint with this question, because I don't have I'm not like super equipment intensive. And I try to keep things really light, because I'm going around the globe, and I'm often like hopping from one flight to another. So I have to keep everything in carry-ons. I got to keep it simple. So the number one thing is I use Kestrel weather meters, because they're small, and they're also accurate. So the two things that are important to me are portability and accuracy. They're accurate to within like about a millibar. And I travel with 4 or 5 of them. So what I do is I like to either plant them at different places, or at least have 2 with me at my location collecting data, so I have redundancy. And like in Dorian, for example, I had that 913.4 millibars. I had another device right next to it that was 913.7. So that's really good corroboration. That tells me that, okay, these data are accurate. So yeah, so I have like a bunch of Kestrels, and then I have a few small cameras. And lately I've been big puzzle for hurricane chasers is how to film, what kinds of devices to use. Every time I get a nice expensive camera, it can't withstand those conditions. It's really frustrating. So I've started my recent combo is a GoPro and a Samsung phone, because both of those cameras are really water resistant. And I find that I could shoot in really rough conditions with those 2 things. So that's what I've been doing lately. It's a combination of GoPro and my Samsung. And then my iPad is actually my main source of information. It's just everything right in my hand. I like it better than my phone in terms of looking at radar and stuff like that. But those are my main things. Obviously, I have flashlights and other like small gadgetry, but nothing that's like too interesting. But those are, I would say, like my main things. I think there's another part to that question, but
yeah, explain how you're different from other chasers and your goals.
Well, I would say the thing that makes me most unique is how very, very narrowly specialized I am. I'm like a weirdo. Okay, I'm really into hurricanes, and anything else, I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like people start asking me questions about snow or dew points, and I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm all about hurricanes, and that's been my obsession since I was like a kid. And I'm all about the hurricane, and I think it's just my extremely narrow specialization, and it's how I am in life. I believe in I'm not the type who wants to be a jack of all trades. I'm the type that wants to be the best at one very specific thing and just sledgehammer it. And for me, it's hurricanes, hunting down hurricane cores. And in terms of how I compare to other hurricane chasers, it's just, I guess, my global reach, that I'm willing to just go anywhere, including to, difficult to reach places in developing countries, sometimes places that aren't safe for political reasons. It's like I go for it. And it's really weird, because in other parts of life, I'm a total pussycat. I'm just this guy who lives in LA. I'm a health nut. I eat really healthy. I like to stay on my routine. I'm like a homebody. It's like nothing about me would suggest that I've got this kind of rabid, really dangerous interest in, flying to the other side of the earth to some weird place I've never been to be in like Category 5 winds. But hey, it's the screw that's loose.
This is the last question I'll have then, Bill. Maybe you have a wrap-up question as well. But how's this year going to be different for you?
Oh, yeah, good question. Really good question. So I have a plan. So the pandemic obviously has changed life for everybody. It's just we're all having to adjust just how we do things. So it looks like East Asia is not going to be in play. A lot of those countries like Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines are the 3 nations or territories, I should say, that I go to. And they're either closed off to outsiders, or if you arrive, for example, in Taiwan, you have to do a 14-day quarantine. So that means I'm expecting that East Asia. I don't think that's going to improve in the next few months. So I basically ruled it out. And people always ask me, well, God, that's weird. You're into hurricanes and you live in LA. What a stupid place to live. Not for me. If I'm hunting in East Asia, in Australia, in the United States and the Caribbean. Actually, LA is the perfect headquarters because I'm a nonstop flight to everywhere. But since I'm not going to East Asia this year, I want to be more central. And so enter Hurricane House. Okay, so since it looks like I'm going to be stuck in the United States, and maybe I might be able to get to Mexico, hopefully I can, but since I'm going to be very US-centric this year, I am going to be living in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, starting in July. And I'm renting a house. Like I said, I'm calling it Hurricane House. That was my mom's idea. And I'm going to be there right after starting July 4th weekend. And the reason is because when I looked at it, I don't want to have to deal with flights this year. I don't want to deal with it. Just flight itineraries are messed up. They're expensive. Who knows if it's safe. From Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, South Texas, like South Padre Island, South Florida, and the Eastern Carolinas, which is the zone I want to cover. Everything is basically within a 12-hour drive. So I'm going to be living in Mississippi, and I'm going to be road tripping to every storm. And the final way it's going to be different. I'm a little bit of a snob. I'm like kind of picky about what I go after. This year, I'm not going to be so picky. I'm probably going to go after every piece of crap just because I'm going to be down there.
Very good. Bill, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
As much as I'd like to see you, I hope I don't see you this summer over in League City, Texas.
Well, I don't take that personally. I know you don't mean it to be unkind, so that's okay. Maybe we could have lunch or something.
Yeah. I'm just not ready to test out the building code on my house, even though I think it's pretty good.
Fair enough.
Excellent talk.
Thank you very much. I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Josh. And I echo Bill's sentiments. We love you, but South Padre is off limits to you this year. We don't want to see you anywhere nearby. Great job. Great job, Josh. Thank you. Fascinating program. We appreciate it. You're always with us at the National Tropical Weather Conference. We hope to see you in person in 2021 back on South Padre Island to do this presentation. And hopefully you won't have chased anything this year. We hope we get to talk about Dorian some more because it's been a quiet year for the U.S. Gulf Coast.
Hey, what am I going to do? I need something to present about. Don't say that.
All right. Thanks. Alex, back to you in San Antonio.
All righty. Here we are back. And, of course, I want to remind everyone, tomorrow is another big day for us. We've got Dr. Phil Klotz back at 10 o'clock Central Daylight Time tomorrow. He's going to be updating his 2020 hurricane seasonal forecast. So that's going to be the big thing that we're going to be watching. Next week, we've got 2 more programs coming your way. Dr. Hal Needham is going to be talking about his U-Surge project, coastal flooding, and then Dr. Joseph Cioni. Boy, he's the guy with flying these small little things called the UASs into hurricanes and gathering data. 2 great programs coming up all the way up there until June 17th. So please be sure and join us. Thanks so much for joining us today. Don't forget you can watch the replay here. We'll share it with you a little bit later. Another thanks to Josh for joining us. And, of course, our big thanks to all our sponsors who kind of make it happen. USAA, South Padre Island, Convention and Bureaus Bureau, and, of course, Plylocks.